Walk through that process, adopting overseas. Why did you do it?
Well, I've lived 4 times in Asia, 3 of them with Mary Kay. I think it really started in the 80s when Mary Kay and I were living, building a joint venture factory in Taiwan in the 1980s. And she would volunteer at a Catholic church orphanage in our neighborhood. And I remember her coming home one day saying, "We've got to bring one of these kids into our family. They have no life, they have no hope, they have no future. There is a need." And selfishly, I would say, we have our own kids. Let's make sure that they're raised to be productive, contributing members of society, and then maybe we can revisit the whole idea of adopting someone. I'd never thought that I would be the father of adoptive children. It just never crossed my mind early in life. And now I wouldn't have it any other way. But we revisited that whole thought many years later in the late 1990s. We lived in Asia 3 times together, and we had a real tie to that part of the world. And we decided that we had a little more love to give after our own 5 biological children. And it's hard to describe beyond words what I mean when I say we had a little more love to give. You just know it at the time. And we started the paperwork, went through the bureaucratics of adopting a child. At the time, in 1999, the relationship was improving between the United States and China. It was right after we had bombed their embassy in Belgrade, as you remember that incident, and the relationship, of course, had soured tremendously in the late 90s. So the relationship was on the uptick, and we waited probably 6 to 8 months, would be my guess, before we were able to adopt little Gracie, who had been abandoned at 2 months of age at a vegetable market in the city of Yangzhou, China. No note, no record, just a child found at the vegetable market. She apparently had a smile on her face because the name they gave her was happiness. So her Chinese name is Yang Leyi. Yang after the town in which she was found, Yangzhou, and Leyi, which basically means happiness or contentment in Chinese. So we were lucky enough to bring her into our family at her roughly being about 6 to 7 months of age. And the minute I laid eyes on her at that orphanage, the connection was complete. I mean, I knew she was ours. That bond of love and affection just happened instantaneously. And that adoption so transformed our family and so transformed my own kids in terms of the way that they saw the world and the appreciation that they had for kids in every corner of this world who have such need, don't have families, they don't have a life to look forward to. They can't aspire to anything great in life because of their circumstances. That some years later, we decided to do it again. We'd just been elected governor, and our life was busy and it was frenetic. It was about the last thing we needed, but again, we had that love to give as a family. And India is another country that has pulled me in over the last 25 or so years, much like China. And we thought, if we're going to adopt another child, let's go to a region that has also had an impact on our lives, and that was India. We went through the process. It was long and it was torturous, as anyone who's been part of this process knows, and it took a long time. But ultimately, we adopted from a Catholic orphanage in rural Gujarat, little Asha, which is Hindi for hope. So her name is Asha Bharati, the hope of India. And her circumstances were quite dire. She was delivered in a little field in rural India, left on the day of her birth, and for whatever reason discovered by some villagers. She has a very loud voice, and she, even at 5 years of age, she makes her presence known wherever she goes. And I think it was that loud voice at birth that probably saved her life. And she was handed over to the local Catholic orphanage, and we adopted her a little more than a year later.
Did your own children accept them immediately?
They did. They were all part of the run-up to the adoption. So the run-up to the adoption can be a very unusually gratifying emotional journey all by itself, where you learn about the circumstances, you begin to bond with the child before you even adopt. And so by the time the adoption occurs, your heart is ready, your mind is ready, your family is prepared because everyone has been part of the application process, the wait, the following of the journey from start to finish. And so our kids were ready with both of them and embraced both Gracie and Asha immediately as they came into our family. And it was a transformative experience, I've just got to tell you. Like few things we've done in life, but a completely transformative experience.
Let's talk about your tenure as governor. What was the most difficult decision that you had to make, and how do you go about making a decision as an executive?
A lot of difficult decisions as governor. Most of them dealing with families in difficult circumstances. Decisions you make all the time. I think those that were most heart-wrenching for me had to do with dealing with families, for example, who had lost a loved one in the theater of combat. As governor, you're the commander-in-chief of the National Guard, and when you lose a member of the Guard and you have to sit down with those family members, when you have to preside and speak at those funerals, that's always a very, very difficult thing to do. And it was always for me a very heart-wrenching thing. I mean, I can say, you know, cutting budgets, dealing with the policy issues around cutting education, cutting human services, those are always very, very difficult things to do during a time of economic austerity. But you do what you need to do to balance budgets. For me, it was always working with families, either families of Guard members who had lost their lives, or, for example, we had a major mining tragedy in our state where we lost several individuals from a small town in Utah, a mining town, a hard-working town, that completely devastated that town and the county in which the town resided. And dealing with those families and in trying to console them and trying to represent all the people of your state in lifting and boosting the morale of a town after such a devastating thing. I mean, the eyes of the country and probably the world were on this small town in Utah during this mining incident. And for me, as I reflect back on my years as governor, it was always the interaction with people that stood out as either the most gratifying or the most heart-wrenching. I guess because I'm a people person more than anything else. And you feel the pain. You feel the pain of people in your state when they're going through it. You know, you feel the difficulty of having to cut budgets, particularly in the areas of education and human services. You feel those lives that are impacted. And you rally together communities where you can't afford to cover maybe some services by bringing religious groups, by bringing foundations, by bringing not-for-profit organizations together to step up and maybe contribute a little bit more. But I've got to say it was a terrific job. And I love being governor. I love the rigors of presiding over a state, being chief executive. I love the interplay with the legislature and the interest groups that are all part of it. I mean, it's like running your own little country. You've got everything that you would see on a national level. It's a microcosm of the country. The thing I liked about the job most is the idea that you can create a vision for the state, and you can share that vision with the people of your state, and then you can execute on that vision, and you can actually pull the levers of power, and through the power of persuasion and the power of the bully pulpit, you can get things done. And then an interesting thing happens. You run for re-election, and the people assess what you did, and particularly in the case of governor, and they remember what you said on the campaign trail, and they remember what you promised to do as governor, and then they look at what you did during your first term, and then they hold you accountable. And for me, that was a very, very important lesson in politics, because I ran on a very specific platform in 2004. I had a 10-point plan, and it was all about economic recovery and getting on our feet and expanding the base and creating jobs, reforming taxes, and reforming health care. And it took us a couple of years, but we got every single one of those points done on the 10-point plan. Took our unemployment down to 2.4%. We cut taxes historically, pretty much down to a flat tax. We became the most competitive, hottest economy, I think, in the country, based on what a lot of magazines were saying. The best managed state in America. So I went back to the electorate in 2008, and I said, if you like your state, if you like what we've done, I ask for your support. If you don't like what we've done, you've got an alternative, vote for somebody else. And we got almost 80% of the vote for re-election.
You're re-elected, and then you get a call from the president to go to China. How much time did you put into that decision?
Days. When it was put on the table and the White House called, there were a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, where we had to think through as a family whether or not this was the right thing for us and for our state and our country. Because I loved being governor. I mean, it was the greatest job in the world. We'd connected with people. We'd been able to achieve a lot of things that a lot of folks had said were downright impossible. And we loved doing it as an entire family. And the thought of moving to the other side of the world, although we had lived there before, with a son who was a football player. They don't have football in China. Kids who were in college, we wouldn't be able to see them. A daughter who was soon to be married. We'd have to disengage from all of that, and it was a very, very painful thing to do as a family. But you know what? We thought military families do it. Foreign service families do it. Folks who serve in embassies all over the world, they make a sacrifice. And if they can do it, we can do it too. If we can make our country a better place by stepping up in a bipartisan fashion and serving. And it was really driven by the whole notion that if you love your country, you serve her. And when your president asks you to step up and serve, even in a bipartisan fashion, you step up and do it. That's a philosophy that I was raised with, and that's a philosophy I'll take to my grave.
And yet again, if you are the nominee, you're running against the person who appointed you ambassador to China.
That's right. That's right. And I served proudly, and I would do it again. But you don't resign your political affiliation, and you don't compromise your worldview when you take a position like U.S. ambassador to China. You bring to the job the skills that you have built up as a manager, as a foreign policy expert, as someone who knows China intimately well, and you go at a job that under 8 presidents now has been a bipartisan spot. And you try your best to protect and defend your country's interests in what today is the world's most important relationship, the U.S.-China relationship.
The person who has been appointed by the president, Jeffrey Immelt, the head of GE, to create jobs, has a company that is leaving jobs in the Midwest and moving to China. Is that part of business?
Well, you have a lot of international companies that are truly global companies. And sadly enough, we don't have enough of a competitive foundation in this country to expand our industrial base and to do what I think is going to need to be done in the years ahead in order to expand our manufacturing base, which today is 10% of our GDP, getting it back to 20 and 25% of our GDP, where it was in 1960 when I was born. So it's a combination of a couple of things. One, there's a legitimate need on the part of multinational companies to service their customer base wherever they might be. And it's not that you're manufacturing in another country and sending it back here. More and more, it's that you're manufacturing in another country to service the needs of that country, because you've got rising GDPs, you've got disposable incomes on the rise in many countries of the world. And if you're a global company in global products and commodities, you've got to service your customer base wherever they happen to be in the world. But the second part of it is we haven't done enough to ensure that we have a competitive economic foundation here in this country. And that's either taxes or that's regulation. That's making a marketplace that is hospitable and conducive to manufacturing growth. We need to do a better job of it here in America. And I do believe that we have an opening. As China becomes more expensive, and as labor rates increase 10 and 15% per year, and as the political situation in the years to come in China becomes a little more tenuous, I think a lot of manufacturers, a lot of international businesses are going to return right here to the preferred marketplace anywhere in the world. We are the preferred marketplace. We're 25% of the world's GDP. We need to improve our environment for growth, taxes and regulation, in order to capture what I think in the years to come is going to be a real opportunity for this country to get back in the game economically.